Hi, my name is Dr. Angie Holzer and I specialize in yoga for mental health. So today we'll hear from Jordan Peterson. I think it's important to hear different perspectives when we think about our healing journey and what we need for our own journey.
Now, we got to think about the chaotic domain for a minute. The chaotic domain is where you don't know what's going to happen. And anything could happen, positive or negative. Anything can happen. And so you can think about the chaotic domain as the birthplace of order. It's the place from which order emerges. Well, it's akin in some sense. Remember what happens in Pinocchio. So Pinocchio goes down into the depths and then into the whale to rescue his father. He goes to the most frightening place possible. And he tests himself against it. And he rescues his father and he brings him up to the surface. But the consequence of that is that he dies. But what dies is the stupid puppet. And so the question is, well, to the degree that you're a stupid puppet, are you willing to let that die? And the answer to that is, it depends on the degree to which you're actually a stupid puppet. Because the more that's true, the more of you has to die. And it's not something trivial. That's why these myths insist upon the horror of the thing that lurks, so to speak, is that death might be enough to actually kill you if you're not properly prepared for it. And that's what happens to people who are extraordinarily traumatized, for example. It's like huge parts of them are killed, and they often don't recover. So it's no joke. Well, and then of course this is often acted out in the real world too. If, this can happen on a psychological basis. And so your own psychological experiences can be enough to radically disrupt and hurt you. But it can be worked out in the real world too, because if you're wandering around naively with your eyes closed and you run into someone who's really psychopathic, they'll take you apart and you'll have no defense against it whatsoever because you're too blind and naive. And if you encounter someone like that and they leave you in the ashes, which they might, it's certainly possible that you'll never recover from it. You just will not be able to handle the aftermath, but also you won't be able to handle the fact that something like that could actually happen. And that's really the nature of trauma. You cannot believe that that could actually happen. And that's an encounter, it's almost always, and this has been the case, certainly been my clinical experience. What traumatizes people is malevolence. It's not tragedy, although tragedy can traumatize people if it's severe enough. But generally, no, people can withstand tragedy. They are done in by real malevolence. And so sometimes it's the realization of their own malevolence that does them in. But when that isn't the case, they encounter someone who's out there in the world who's actually operating to hurt them. And if the person is psychopathic enough, and this actually goes beyond pure psychopathy, because at least the psychopath has the sense to be self-interested. You can go far farther than that, where you're perfectly willing to hurt yourself as long as you hurt the other person at the same time. What they want to say is, life means nothing to me, nothing. But I'm perfectly willing to make as many people as I possibly can suffer before I demonstrate that. And so that's a step past psychopathy. And if you encounter that in someone, or in yourself, that's going to be a deeply unsettling experience. And the idea behind many of these stories is that you cannot figure out what to do about that before you have an encounter like that. And if you think about that properly, that's as horrifying an experience as you can imagine, right? It's precisely that. It's as horrifying an experience as you can imagine.
Freud certainly posited that many forms of psychological distress were a consequence of childhood trauma of various sorts. I think the existentialist take on that is more accurate, which is that life in and of itself is sufficiently harsh and full of betrayal and other forms of malevolence to cause any number of psychological diseases and produce any amount of aberrant behavior. So I don't think it has to be, it's not as if we all had childhoods without trauma that we would have grown up to be perfect adults. That's also a disguised form of Rousseauian philosophy, and Rousseau's philosophy is people are basically good, but culture makes them evil. And that's not true. People are basically good and evil, and culture fortifies the possibility of both, adds strength to the possibility of both. So I think that people are sometimes damaged in childhood in ways that need to be addressed in adulthood, but that there are plenty of other reasons for psychological and physical disorder. Genetic causes, causes related to all sorts of physical diseases. No, it's way too simple. It's way too simple a hypothesis. And it's caused an awful lot of trouble because a lot of simple-minded therapists always assume that if someone is having psychological problems in adulthood, it must be because they had childhood trauma. And everybody has an unhappy childhood to some degree, so you can always find something. And so they dig and dig until they find or often invent something that, allows a single causal attribution. And it's just, life just isn't that simple, man. There's lots of reasons to be ill. Way more reasons to be ill than to be healthy.
You have to go somewhere. So let's say, well, you want to figure out where you want to go, and you need to figure out how do you get there. Well, the first thing you need to know, just like you do if you're in a car and you're trying to go somewhere, is, well, where are you? And you might think you know, but you probably don't know because you're fragmented and fractured by the unresolved issues in your past. And so you're kind of all over the place. You haven't got your act together. Things have fallen apart around you. And so the first thing you do is you have to call yourself together. Well, let's define what processing means. Okay, so, let's say that you had a pretty painful history of being bullied when you were 13, and you're still carrying that with you. You carry it with you in your posture. You carry it with you in your assumptions about people. This is all implicit, right? It's not explicit. You carry it with you in the form of resentment and questions about what it might have been, and you carry it with you because you've been demeaned by it. But you're not 13 anymore. You're 40. And those experiences are not transferable in any simple manner to your current reality. So you go back and you think, okay, what happened? What exactly happened? And what happened means is, what were the causal pathways that put me in that position of vulnerability and inferiority? And you want to specify them as carefully as possible, because what the part of you that's hanging on to that wants to know is, have you changed enough so that that won't happen again? And if the answer to that is yes, even through thinking, you realize, well, I'm not that person anymore. Or you go back to the experience and you figure out, oh, this is what I did and I could stop doing that. Then the icy hands of that traumatic experience will release, that you will be released from it. Because what your mind wants to know, your unconscious mind, let's say, is, have you resolved this issue to the degree that it is unlikely that it will occur again? Partly what you want to do is to go over your past and figure out, okay, what stupid things did I do, or in what manner was I insufficient so that this negative destiny was more likely to visit me? Now, you don't assume that everything that happened to you was your fault or under your control. You do want to figure out, okay, well, if I played some hand in this and that could be rectified, well, then I should figure out how to rectify it, because then I won't be in this situation anymore.